There are two things behind me. One is an incredibly dirty 2024 Subaru Crosstrek, and the other is the northern shore of Lake Superior. I took this Subaru on a road trip to find out how much fun you could have with one of those and one of these. This is an Ontario Parks Pass, and right now Subaru is partnering with national and provincial parks in Canada to get Subaru owners out there. So to test the two together, I took the Subaru Crosstrek 2,400 kilometers from Toronto along the shores of Lake Superior to Thunder Bay and back. Right now, you're catching me at the halfway point. We are at the northernmost part of our trip, and in fact, the northernmost part of the Great Lakes. Along the way, we learned a lot about what it's like to live with the Subaru Crosstrek, some of its perks, its quirks, and its irks. So despite the fact that this is only the halfway point, we've already done some 1,400 kilometers in this vehicle. Now the Crosstrek comes in 4 distinct trim levels. There's Convenience, Touring, Onyx, and Limited. We have the top trim, Limited. It's the luxury-oriented model, and it comes in at about $39,500. The base Convenience trim, well, that'll run you about $31,500, and those numbers include freight and delivery. Now the big news is actually under the hood for 2024, where the Subaru Crosstrek gets a much needed injection of power. Only the base Convenience trim gets the 2-liter Boxer 4, which makes 152 horsepower, but all the other trim levels get a much improved 2.5-liter non-turbo Boxer engine, which makes 182 horsepower. All Crosstrek models come mated to a CVT automatic and full-time symmetrical all-wheel drive. We've put that 2.5-liter engine to the test of fuel economy and power, pulling us over some really big hills on the north shore of Lake Superior. I would say the power with a 2.5 is adequate. It's not a hot rod, but previous Crosstreks were a little pokey. This one has sufficient power to get you over the hills and makes passing maneuvers on those 2-lane roads. I would say the extra money spent to get the 2.5-liter engine is definitely worth it. If you're worried that the larger engine impacts fuel economy, our best result was about 6.6 liters per 100K when we were going only about 90 kilometers an hour through a bunch of construction zones. On open road cruising up and over hills at around 110 to 115 kilometers per hour, we were getting about 7.0 to 7.2. So that is the real world fuel economy averages that you can expect with the new engine. And at this point, you might notice that this is one of the most filthy, dirty driving press vehicles ever on camera. That's because there was a massive accident in a stretch of the Trans-Canada Highway where we needed to travel to. The stretch between White Lake and Marathon was completely blocked. While waiting in traffic, we heard reports that the highway could be closed for up to 24 hours. Thus, we had to find a way around it. Between the towns of Calumet and Geraldton, Ontario, we basically had to link the Highway 17 to Highway 11 with nothing but gravel logging roads. We spent 130 kilometers on gravel logging roads, and this Subaru Crosstrek took it like a champ. There were mud puddles, washboards, big rocks, loose gravel. It handled it all. And I am impressed with how well this car felt off-road. The longer travel suspension of the Crosstrek made it supremely comfortable, and the full-time all-wheel drive made it very stable in all situations, even on that sketchy road. The Subaru Crosstrek delivered us where we needed to go, and it was nothing more than a fun diversion. Welcome to the office that I have been working from for the past 7 days or so. Because this is the limited trim, you get contrasting orange stitching on the steering wheel, on the shift boot, and on the seats, and an 11.6-inch touchscreen display. It's tablet style, it's vertically oriented. I do like it. It is a bit odd to have a lot of the HVAC controls on a touchscreen panel. And honestly, when you're driving, sometimes it means that you have to look at the screen more than I'd like to adjust car functions. However, there are hard buttons for the essentials like your hazard lights, your temperature control up and down, and window defog. Now, one of the things is that I'm sitting in the only power adjustable seat in the Crosstrek. Even on this top trim, the passenger does not get a power seat, and the power seat that I'm in is very comfortable, but it doesn't have a memory function. And on a long trip like this where we're swapping drivers again and again and again, it would be nice to hit a button and have all your mirror and seat presets saved, ready to go. The Limited is also the only trim that gets the premium Harman Kardon sound system. We found it to be pretty good. It didn't blow us away, but we were impressed with its quality. But the big thing is that living in this cockpit, The seats are very comfortable. We like the way the wheel is shaped. It's very ergonomic. I like the way that things are shaped in here. I can get a good view of the gauges. I can get a good handle on the shifter. Everything is kind of where I like it. The interior does impress. And the other thing is that, ironically, this is the Subaru eyesight system you see here, flanking the rear view mirror. And it actually blocks a fair bit of eyesight. It does work well, but it does take up a lot of real estate on the windshield. Inside there are USB-C and USB-A charge ports in the top trim limited. There's also a wireless charging pad and wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. We love when the automakers pair that wireless charging capability with the wireless connectivity. It makes a very seamless experience. I also like this added little bonus cubby here behind the console. It catches keys, sunglasses, and all the little flotsam that seems to accumulate on a road trip. I also like that there's water bottle storage in both doors, 2 generous cup holders in the console. There's a lot of storage for all the things you need on a road trip. And you can store one of these. This is a Ontario Parks Pass, and right now Subaru is partnering with a bunch of parks in Canada. They're partnering with Canadian National Parks, 80 national parks, which covers 450,000 square kilometers, and the provincial parks of Ontario, New Brunswick, and British Columbia. If you live in Canada and you buy a new 2023 Subaru Forester Wilderness, you'll get a group or a family adventure pass, which grants you access to all of these parks for free. We took advantage of that. We have an Ontario Parks Pass hanging from our window, courtesy of Subaru, and we visited 4 provincial parks on this trip. We visited Lake Superior Provincial Park, we visited Sleeping Giant Provincial Park, we visited Porphyry Island Provincial Park, and later today we plan to make it to Kakabeka Falls Provincial Park. The tie-in with Subaru and national and provincial parks is, I think, a very natural one. And in fact, every time we'd pull into a park's parking lot, we were not the only Crosstrek there. People that go to parks and see the country's beauty and experience the nature, they like to do it in a car that's rugged but also comfortable. And I think it's a very symbiotic relationship between Subaru and Parks Canada and the provincial parks. Frankly, if you live in Canada, you owe it to yourself. Get out there and see some parks this summer. Now, it's also inside that some of the most annoying things happen in the Subaru, and that would be primarily the beeping. It beeps at you for starting the car without a seatbelt on. It beeps at you for moving the car to a different parking spot without a seatbelt on. It beeps at you to let you know that the adaptive cruise control has spotted another car in your range. It beeps at you to let you know that that car has left your range. It beeps at you to let you know that you have rolled over the white line in the center of the road. It beeps at you if you drive over the shoulder. These are all things that you shouldn't really be doing, but sometimes, for example, if there's a bicyclist and he's on the shoulder, you want to give that cyclist a lot of room, and so you'll move over the center line as you pass them. It would be nice to do that on purpose without being beeped at all the time. And on a long road trip, I must have been beeped at several hundred times by this car. We went through the settings. We can't find a way to turn off the beeps. We can turn off the menu beeps, but the system beeps with the key functions and the adaptive cruise. It would be really nice to be able to mute that after a while, because on a long drive, it really gets beeping annoying. Welcome to the back seat of the Subaru Crosstrek, or the closet, like we've been using it. We've been using it as a catch-all for our sleeping bags, our books, our binoculars, our road snacks, everything that you want to have on a long trip. Now, the Subaru Crosstrek probably has a back seat that is comfy on long journeys. It does have USB-C and USB-A charging connectivity and decent windows to check out the views. However, we didn't really use the back seat for anything but storage. And the sunroof makes it feel a little bit more open for backseat passengers. And mosquitoes. I can say that for 2 people, the Subaru Crosstrek has more than enough cargo capacity for your stuff. However, if we were going to do this big trip with 4 people, it might get a little cramped. And for that, let's go to the actual cargo hatch in the very back. I've been waiting for somebody to write "wash me" on our very dirty car, but it hasn't happened yet. So now we're in the actual cargo area of the Subaru, and you have little mini Crosstreks on a mountain road trip as well. Isn't that cute? So we found that this cargo area is actually perfectly shaped for carry-on bags. Obviously, if you turn them sideways, like so, they fit pretty much perfectly up against a cargo cover, which only the limited trim gets. Lower trims do not get a cargo cover. But we've typically had it full of so much stuff that we don't need one because it piles right to the roof. So for 2 people, this is plenty of room for stuff. However, it is going to be a little tight for 4 people. It also has a decently high liftover height, but I like the fact that it's very wide. A lot of small CUVs have very narrow cargo openings. The Subaru one is very wide. It's easy to load stuff inside of it. Those are the waters of Lake Superior, and this is what I think is the superior engine choice for the Subaru Crosstrek. The 2.5 liter is really the way to go. It makes 182 horsepower and 178 pound-feet of torque versus like 150 horsepower and 145 pound-feet of torque for the 2 liter. I really think you want the 2.5, especially considering the fuel mileage we've been getting, which is about 7.0 liters per 100 kilometers, which is pretty good considering that we have it loaded full of stuff and we're driving it like normal people. So it doesn't have a turbo, it's backed by a CVT. It's not the most sporty combination, but it has taken us everywhere we want to go. There is also a noticeable vibration with this engine, and the start-stop feature is not very smooth. But it makes power, it gets us where we want to go, and it delivers decent fuel economy. And it's the ticket to Subaru having that symmetrical all-wheel drive system that so many people like. The big takeaway here is that the 2.5 is probably the best engine the Crosstrek has ever come with, and it's worth it to go up from the convenience trim to get it. Now ours is the limited trim, which is the fully loaded kind of luxury oriented trim, but one notch below that is the Onyx trim, and that is a bit more off-road focused. One of the things we noticed when we took it, on our 70-mile gravel trek was that these Falcon tires are decent off-road, but they're not really off-road focused tires. If you want the more off-road focused tires, you would go to the Onyx trim. Otherwise, all the gravel and dust on the side of this car is an interesting way to show that Subaru's new aero from these vents really works. You can actually see the positive pressure from the wheel well being evacuated through the vents and being sent down the low pressure zone on the side of the car. Aero in action via dust. Now these gray mirror caps are only on the limited trim, and as you may have noticed, in some places you can still see some orange paint, and this orange is a little bit less of a pumpkin orange than it was with the previous generation, and frankly, I miss the pumpkin orange. I wish the more dramatic colors would come back, but it's still a fun color and it has a lot of depth to it, especially if I washed it. So there you have it. We learned a lot with our time with the Crosstrek. We learned that it basically is a road trip vehicle that can handle it all for 2 people. If you're doing a road trip with 4 people, you might find the space is a little lacking. But for a truly go-anywhere vehicle that's incredibly livable on the pavement, the Subaru Crosstrek is basically an off-roader that you can live with every day. I'm glad we had the chance to test it off-road and on the pavement. And so even though we're just at the halfway point of this trip, from here, I'm gonna turn around and head south all the way back to Toronto. I'm gonna use a lot of adaptive cruise control, and I'm gonna hear a lot of beeps. And once we're in Toronto, I'm gonna give it a much-deserved bath. For Driving.ca from Thunder Bay, I'm Clayton Seams. And for more road trip reviews, don't forget to follow us online at Driving.ca on Instagram and Twitter.